Good morning. It's Monday, y'all, the 7th of October, 2024. Hope you had a good weekend. Ours is pretty good. Corey wasn't feeling the best yesterday, so just pray for her and her back. Pray for one another. It is a new week. Lots of things going on around the world still, too. So we are full swing into fall here in Northeast or Northwest Ohio. So, and as of yesterday, I hope you were able to attend a Bible believing preaching church. Last week, I outlined why I feel it's important that you be in a Bible believing, preaching, teaching, and church. And if you don't know if one's in your area or not, send me a message and I will look into your area. Just send me a message. If you're watching this on Facebook Live, you can look there. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can look there as well. Or just there's ways to contact me on YouTube. Just go to my website, brokenroadjourney.com. There's a contact page there. You can reach out to me. If you're watching this on YouTube, you just go to my website, brokenroadjourney.com, and there is a contact page. You can send me a message. I'll help you find a Bible believing preaching church. Or if you have a prayer request, please message me or send me a message through my YouTube, my website, or here on Facebook. Or if you have a question about something I talk about in the Bible, please message me also. So I'm not here to argue or fight or debate. I want to be able to answer questions you might have. I'm looking at this at a perspective of some of you may have never seen before. Some of the things that I've taught, I know that these are some things that some people that have watched these videos, these are things that they've never heard before. And I've had some pushback from some people. That's why I spent so much time talking about baptism, because of a conversation I had with somebody on my YouTube channel over that. So, all right, so we're going to intro to Acts chapter 18. This is where Paul, he has left Athens and he's went to Corinth. So we're just going to open this up, read verses 1 through 6, maybe break it down just a little bit, and then we'll continue to break it down the rest of this week. And then eventually, maybe this week or next week, we will get back into First Corinthians. I may take a detour to go to First and Second Thessalonians. The only reason I might do that is because it's something I've covered with this daily devotion is First and Second Thessalonians. I've also covered Philippians, and then I went into Corinthians. But the thing with the book of Acts, as far as the Paul's letters go and coinciding with the book of Acts, this would be the second group of letters here in Corinth, the second group of letters to churches that Paul wrote to shortly after Acts chapter 18. Well, I would say 57, about 3 or 4 years after Acts chapter 18, he wrote to Corinth. But not long after his journey to Thessalonica, he wrote First and Second Thessalonians. So if you're reading your Bible, a good way to go once you read the book of Acts is to go through Paul's epistles in kind of an order. And I have an order where I wrote these out. And if you want this, maybe I'll put this in detail somewhere. But the order how Paul wrote his epistles was First and Second Thessalonians, First and Second Corinthians, and that coincides here in Acts chapter 18. Then Galatians, Romans, Ephesians, Philippians, Philemon, Colossians, First and Second, or First Timothy, Titus, and Second Timothy. That is the order of Paul's writings, and we get that through a timeline that somebody had put through about Paul's letters in the Book of Acts as far as the timeline goes. So if you ever want that, just message me. And that's a good way to read the New Testament, putting it in perspective. Read the Book of Acts, and once you get down to the Book of Acts, you go to First and Second Thessalonians, First and Second Corinthians, Galatians, Romans, and I flipped that Romans to Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Philemon, Colossians, First and Timothy, Titus, and Second Timothy. Second Timothy is his last epistle that he ever wrote before he was offered up, before he was martyred for the cause of Christ. All right, so here in the book of Acts, chapter 18, and after these things, Paul departed from Athens and came to Corinth, and found a certain Jew named Aquila, born in Pontus, lately come from Italy, with his wife Priscilla, because that Claudius had commanded all Jews to depart from Rome, and came unto them. And because he was of the same craft, he abode with them and wrought for by their occupation they were tent makers. Now with the Apostle Paul, there's nothing deep we're going to talk about today, really. But the Apostle Paul, as he would travel to these different churches, Paul actually worked. He didn't rely on support from the churches of that time. I air quotes churches, because this was something that was kind of new. Paul was starting churches in the areas where he was at, and he was training up preachers. But Paul had an occupation. That way he would not be a burden to the people where he was preaching at. And his occupation, he was a tent maker. That's why Paul was very adamant that we work with our own hands and we stay busy and we work and provide for our families. That's what Paul did. Paul provided for himself through his own occupation. Now, he was a preacher. He was an apostle and a preacher. However, he still worked. And that's important today, especially for pastors that are coming out of Bible college and feel God is calling them to be pastors and stuff. There's nothing wrong with you working as you're building the church up. When I pastored, I worked a part-time job. I pastored kind of more full-time than part-time, but I also worked a part-time job because my church couldn't support me. There are a lot of churches out there that cannot full-time support their pastors. But the unfortunate part of that is there's a lot of young men coming up out of Bible colleges that will not pastor a church unless that church can support them full time. And unfortunately, for Bible-believing preaching churches, that's just very hard for a lot of churches to do. Now, there are many churches out there that do support their pastors full time. But the majority of the pastors, they actually work a regular job and pastor a church. My pastor, though we support him full time as a pastor, still supplements his income by working. He just recently, within the last couple of years, we were able to pay him more. So, but he still works. And that's okay, as long as it doesn't interfere with his duties or a pastor's duties of being a pastor. That work cannot supersede his duties as a pastor, because that's his main calling. All right, and then with Paul, he was called an apostle and a preacher, and he would start these churches. But here in verse 3, Acts chapter 18, verse 3, he still worked. He still had a regular day job, and that was making tents. And then verse 4, and he reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath and persuaded the Jews and the Greeks. And when Silas and Timotheus were come from Macedonia, Paul was pressed in his spirit and testified to the Jews that Jesus was Christ. Again, wherever Paul would go, he would seek out a synagogue first and go preach there. Then he would go to the streets and preach to the Gentiles around. And when they opposed themselves and blasphemed, he shook his raiment and said unto them, your blood be upon your own heads. I am clean from henceforth. I will go unto the Gentiles. Paul said, enough is enough. I'm done with you. I have tried. I went to the Jew first. Now I'm going to the Gentiles because I am tired. You guys have beaten me. You've blasphemed God. You've accused me of blasphemy. Your blood's on your own hands at this point. He was done. He wiped his hands clean of preaching to the Jews. Now, did he still try to reason with them some? Yes. But not like he was before, the Jew first and then to the Greek. He's saying here right now, I'm done with y'all. I have tried. And I've reasoned with you, but you continue to blaspheme. You accuse me of blaspheme. Your blood's on your own hands now. I'm done. He wiped his hands of them, shook the dust off his feet, and moved on. Now, this is an example for us when it comes to preaching and teaching to the lost when we're going out there. There comes to a point you have to just wash your hands of them. I've had to do that. I have talked to people and I've tried to minister to them. And this is going for saved and lost, both. Lost, I've finally just said, okay, we're not going to do this anymore. I'm done. You're not listening. I'm not going to argue. I'm not going to debate with you. You won't hear the truth. We're not going to talk about it anymore. And the conversation ends, and majority of times I don't talk to the person ever again But you know what? Their blood's not on my hands. The same with Paul here. He's saying to them, your blood's no longer on my hands. I have tried. Paul was actually fulfilling Ezekiel, where God told Ezekiel, if you don't warn them and they die in their sin, their blood will be required upon your hands. But if you do warn them and they reject me, their blood's not on your hands because you have tried. And that's what Paul has done here. And there comes many a time where we just have to shake the dust off our feet and move on. The other side of the coin of that is dealing with Christians that have decided to walk off into their own sin and reject God's teaching anymore for their life and God's lordship. I'm not saying they've lost their salvation. What I'm saying is they've broken their fellowship to the point that you cannot tell if they're saved or lost, and you have tried to help restore them, and you've tried and you've tried and you've tried, and they refuse to get right. There comes a point where you just have to shake the dust off your feet, wipe your hands clean to the situation, and walk away. And we have a good example on point with the Apostle Paul with his dealing to the Jews. All right, that's all I have for you today. Just a quick intro. Tomorrow we'll pick up in verse 7 through 11. Hope you have a great day. God bless y'all, and talk to you tomorrow.